Avoidant partners can sometimes appear intensely attached once certain subtle shifts occur in the way you relate to them. This is rarely driven by dramatic effort or emotional intensity, but by quiet psychological signals that communicate safety, autonomy, and respect. People with an avoidant attachment style respond most strongly when they feel emotionally free, rather than pressured or controlled. It is not so much about what is said directly, but about how someone carries themselves in the relationship space. When you stop overextending emotionally, stop trying to control outcomes, and stop seeking constant reassurance, their perception begins to shift. Love starts to feel less like pressure and more like a voluntary experience. The first major change happens when you stop chasing completely, removing constant pursuit and emotional over-explanation, which creates space for a more natural and unforced connection to begin forming. This absence of pursuit reduces internal pressure they associate with closeness. Instead of feeling cornered or overwhelmed, their nervous system begins to relax. The connection no longer feels like something they must manage or defend against. It becomes emotionally lighter, and that lightness creates curiosity. When you are no longer constantly available in an anxious or reactive way, they start to notice your stability and calm presence more clearly. Your emotional self-control signals that you are not dependent on their responses to feel secure. Over time, this creates a paradox where distance actually increases attraction. They begin to think about you more often, not because you are demanding attention, but because you are no longer forcing it. This is where attachment starts to form naturally, driven by freedom rather than pressure. You also created a strong shift by respecting their space without turning it into punishment. When they pulled back, you didn't respond with emotional retaliation, guilt, or attempts to make them feel wrong for needing distance. You didn't use silence as revenge or coldness as a reaction. Instead, you stayed steady and allowed them the room to process themselves without emotional consequences attached to their withdrawal. This kind of response feels unfamiliar to them, and it slowly reshapes how safe the connection feels. It removes the fear that distance will automatically lead to conflict or emotional damage. Over time, they begin to associate your presence with calm stability rather than pressure or control. This builds trust, softens resistance, and makes them more willing to return on their own terms because space no longer feels like something that risks the connection. You didn't make their distance feel like something dangerous or like it would cost the relationship. That detail alone carries a lot of psychological weight. People with avoidant tendencies often carry a quiet expectation that closeness eventually leads to pressure, loss of freedom, or emotional demands they can't comfortably sustain. Many partners unknowingly confirm that fear by reacting strongly when distance shows up. But your response didn't follow that pattern. You didn't turn their space into conflict, and you didn't attach emotional punishment to their need for distance. Instead, you stayed steady. You allowed them room to breathe while still holding your own emotional center. That combination is rare, and it creates a sense of safety they don't usually experience in relationships. Over time, that kind of consistency changes how they interpret intimacy. Your presence starts to feel like something that can exist without tension, even when they pull away. You weren't withdrawing love or using silence as a reaction. You were simply not interfering with their autonomy. That distinction matters. It tells their nervous system that closeness doesn't automatically equal pressure, and distance doesn't automatically equal loss. Slowly, that reduces their internal resistance. What used to feel overwhelming begins to feel manageable, even comfortable. Instead of associating connection with stress, they start associating it with calmness and stability. This shift doesn't happen loudly or quickly. It builds quietly in the background, shaping how they experience you on a deeper emotional level. The third thing that created strong attachment was your emotional regulation during difficult moments. Avoidant individuals are highly sensitive to emotional intensity. When conversations turn into anger, panic, frustration, or emotional urgency, their system often reads it as danger. Not necessarily because they don't care, but because intensity feels unpredictable and overwhelming to them. In past experiences, that kind of emotional energy may have signaled conflict or loss of control, which naturally pushes them to withdraw. But your response was different. You stayed composed even when things became uncomfortable. You didn't escalate, you didn't plead, and you didn't let your emotions spill in a way that created pressure in the moment. That steadiness changes the entire emotional environment. Instead of feeling like they need to defend themselves or escape, they begin to feel safe staying present. Your calmness creates a kind of emotional grounding they can rely on, even when things are uncertain. Over time, they start to associate your presence with stability rather than tension. The contrast becomes very noticeable to them. Where other connections may have felt chaotic or overwhelming, yours feels predictable and safe. That predictability builds trust in a quiet but powerful way. They don't feel pushed away by your emotions. Instead, they feel allowed to exist without fear of emotional overload. This is what gradually pulls them closer, not through force, but through comfort and consistency. The fourth shift happened when you stopped constantly seeking reassurance. Avoidant individuals often feel pressure when they are repeatedly asked to confirm feelings, define the relationship, or provide emotional validation on demand. Questions like, "Do you care?" or "Are we okay?" can unintentionally create a sense of being monitored or emotionally cornered. Over time, that can make them withdraw further, not because they lack feelings, but because they feel overwhelmed by the expectation to constantly prove them. You broke that cycle by stepping back from reassurance-seeking behaviors and grounding yourself internally instead of relying on their responses to regulate your emotions. This change is deeply noticeable to them, even if they don't express it directly. When you stop asking for constant validation, they begin to see something different in you: emotional independence. You're no longer emotionally unstable based on their responses, and that creates a sense of space around the connection. Instead of feeling pressured to constantly reassure or manage your emotions, they are able to simply observe you as someone who is self-contained and steady. That kind of presence naturally draws their attention. It feels less demanding and more balanced, which makes it easier for them to stay engaged without feeling trapped. Over time, this quiet stability becomes something they begin to value more than they expected. They began to find themselves thinking more about your emotional state and your quiet consistency, not because you were pushing them away, but because you created a space where connection wasn't forced or demanded. Everything felt optional rather than obligatory. For someone with avoidant tendencies, that shift is powerful. They are far more likely to open up when love doesn't feel like something they are being pressured to perform. When you stopped asking for constant reassurance, it sent a deeper message than words ever could. You weren't depending on them to regulate your emotions. You were steady on your own. That kind of presence changes the emotional tone of the relationship in a very subtle but important way. Instead of feeling responsible for constantly managing someone else's emotional stability, they are allowed to simply experience the connection without pressure. That eases the nervous system, which is usually on alert for emotional demands or expectations. When that pressure disappears, curiosity starts to take its place. They begin to wonder about you more, not out of confusion or distance alone, but because your calm self-sufficiency stands out. Love in this form doesn't feel heavy or consuming. It feels open and breathable, and in that space, attachment starts to form more naturally. Your quiet confidence communicates that closeness is available, but never forced, and that balance is what makes the connection feel safe enough to grow. The fifth shift was your emotional independence. Avoidant individuals tend to highly value autonomy and can become uncomfortable in relationships where emotional reliance feels too strong or one-sided. When they sense someone is depending on them for validation, stability, or emotional direction, they often retreat, not because they lack care, but because they feel overwhelmed by the responsibility that comes with that dependence. What made your approach different was that you didn't place your emotional stability in their hands. You had your own life, your own sense of identity, and your own internal balance that didn't revolve around their reactions or attention. That independence creates a very specific kind of attraction. Instead of feeling needed in a way that creates pressure, they experience you as someone who is whole on your own. This removes the emotional burden they often anticipate in relationships and replaces it with curiosity and respect. Your boundaries, even when unspoken, communicated self-worth and emotional clarity. They could sense that your presence wasn't dependent on their validation. Over time, that creates a dynamic where closeness feels safe rather than demanding. It becomes something they can choose freely rather than something they are emotionally obligated to maintain. And that freedom makes connection feel more appealing, not less. The sixth and final element was that you allowed them to come toward you in their own time and in their own way. Avoidant individuals struggle with pressure around emotional expression. When they feel pushed to respond, commit, or open up before they are ready, their instinct is often to pull back to regain control and emotional space. What changed the dynamic was that you didn't interfere with that process. You didn't chase after hesitation, and you didn't turn their slower pace into a problem that needed fixing. Instead, you stayed grounded and available without trying to force emotional movement. That kind of response creates a rare emotional environment for them. It communicates respect for their autonomy while still maintaining your own presence and self-respect. They are not being cornered, judged, or rushed, and that allows their natural curiosity to surface. When connection is not forced, it becomes something they can step into voluntarily, which feels much safer to them. Over time, they begin to associate you with emotional safety rather than pressure. And in that space, attachment develops quietly but deeply, not because they were pushed, but because they were free to choose you on their own terms. When an avoidant experiences a connection that feels available without pressure, something subtle but powerful starts to shift inside them. Their attachment system doesn't activate through force or urgency. It activates through safety and choice. In that kind of environment, they begin to notice you more naturally, think about you in quieter moments, and become curious about your emotional world. Instead of feeling pushed or emotionally cornered, they feel free enough to lean in on their own terms. That freedom is what makes their interest grow. They may start reaching out first, initiating conversations, or showing small signs of closeness, not because they were convinced, but because nothing about the connection feels controlling or overwhelming. This is where emotional attraction becomes more organic. When they don't feel trapped, their nervous system relaxes, and curiosity replaces resistance. Your calm and steady presence plays a major role in that shift. It communicates, without needing explanation, that you are not demanding anything from them emotionally. You are available, but not dependent. That balance creates a paradox that deeply influences them. The more freedom they feel, the more emotionally drawn they become. Instead of pulling away from closeness, they begin to approach it willingly, because it no longer feels like something they must protect themselves from. Over time, this creates a quiet but powerful form of attachment built on comfort rather than pressure. Allowing them to come toward you also reflects a strong sense of self-respect and emotional boundaries. It shows that your presence isn't something that needs to be chased or proven. You remain grounded in your own value, regardless of how quickly or slowly they respond. That unspoken stability becomes part of what they find so compelling. It removes urgency from the connection and replaces it with ease. In that space, they don't feel controlled or evaluated. They feel free to engage at their own pace. And ironically, that freedom often increases their emotional investment instead of decreasing it. When all 6 behaviors come together, stopping the chase, respecting space, staying emotionally regulated, not seeking constant reassurance, maintaining emotional independence, and allowing them to approach you, something deeper begins to form. Their internal resistance slowly lowers. The relationship no longer feels like pressure or expectation, but like a safe emotional space they can enter without fear. This is when attachment begins to deepen in a more lasting way, not through intensity, but through consistency and emotional safety. Avoidant individuals rarely experience love in loud or dramatic ways. Their connection builds quietly, internally, and often goes unspoken for a long time, even while it grows stronger beneath the surface. At its core, avoidant attachment is not about a lack of desire for connection. It is about sensitivity to pressure and emotional overwhelm. When that pressure is removed and replaced with calm, steady presence, their experience of love begins to change. They start to associate you with safety instead of tension, and closeness becomes something they can choose rather than something they must escape from. That shift is what allows genuine attachment to form, not through chasing or convincing, but through emotional steadiness, patience, and respect for autonomy. Over time, this creates a bond that feels more natural, stable, and deeply rooted in trust rather than fear. If you've experienced these dynamics in your own relationships, it often becomes easier to recognize how subtle these shifts really are. Attachment doesn't always announce itself loudly. It builds quietly in the background of how safe someone feels with you. In the end, what this really comes down to is not tactics, games, or trying to decode someone's behavior, but understanding how safety shapes emotional connection. When someone with avoidant tendencies feels pressure, their natural response is to step back, not because they are incapable of love, but because closeness has historically felt overwhelming or demanding. But when the emotional environment changes, when there is no chasing, no emotional punishment, no constant need for reassurance, and no pressure to respond a certain way, something important begins to shift internally for them. They stop experiencing the relationship as something that takes away their freedom and start experiencing it as something that simply exists alongside their independence. That difference is subtle, but it completely changes how attachment develops. Instead of associating intimacy with stress, their nervous system begins to associate it with calmness. Instead of feeling like they have to protect themselves, they start to feel like they can simply be present. And in that state, connection becomes something they move toward naturally, without being pushed or convinced. What often gets missed in this topic is that attachment is not something you can directly trigger in another person through specific behaviors. What you can influence is the emotional climate between two people, and that climate determines whether someone feels safe enough to move closer or feels pressured enough to move away. With avoidant patterns, this sensitivity to pressure is more pronounced, but the underlying principle applies to everyone in different ways. People move toward what feels safe and away from what feels overwhelming. When someone starts to feel emotionally safe around you, their defenses don't disappear all at once. It happens gradually, in layers. At first, they simply stop feeling the need to withdraw as strongly. Then they begin to stay present a little longer in conversations or moments of closeness. Later, they may start initiating contact more often or showing curiosity in ways they didn't before. These shifts are not usually conscious decisions. They are nervous system responses to repeated experiences of calm, consistency, and lack of threat. A key part of this process is predictability without pressure. If your emotional responses are stable, if your presence doesn't swing between urgency and withdrawal, the other person begins to internally relax. They are no longer scanning for emotional consequences or preparing for conflict. That reduction in internal alertness creates space for genuine curiosity. And curiosity is often the first bridge toward emotional attachment. At the same time, your own emotional stance plays a major role. When you are anchored in yourself, you are not constantly measuring your worth through someone else's reactions. That removes the anxious urgency that often creates push-pull dynamics in relationships. Instead of trying to secure closeness, you are participating in it. This shift is subtle, but it completely changes the energy. It turns the interaction from something reactive into something steady. It's also important to understand that avoidant tendencies are not simply about not wanting closeness. They are more about wanting closeness without losing autonomy. So when they encounter someone who does not invade their space, does not escalate emotional intensity unnecessarily, and does not attach pressure to connection, their resistance naturally decreases. They are not being convinced. They are experiencing less internal threat. But even more important than how the other person responds is what this dynamic teaches you about yourself. Emotional independence in this context is not about disconnecting or suppressing needs. It is about being able to hold your emotional center without outsourcing it. That means your mood, stability, and sense of worth are not entirely dependent on someone else's attention or consistency. This is what creates real grounded presence, and it is often what makes interactions feel more balanced and less chaotic. Over time, relationships built on this kind of energy tend to feel more sustainable. There is less chasing, less emotional volatility, and less confusion about where things stand. Instead, there is a gradual unfolding where both people adjust at their own pace. Nothing is forced into acceleration, but nothing is held back by fear either. The deeper truth is that healthy attachment is not about figuring out the perfect way to make someone stay emotionally engaged. It is about creating conditions where both people do not feel the need to protect themselves from each other. When that happens, connection becomes something that develops naturally, without pressure, without urgency, and without losing yourself in the process. At the same time, what you are doing in this dynamic is just as important. You are not abandoning yourself to maintain closeness. You are not shrinking your needs, overextending emotionally, or chasing validation that leaves you anxious and unsteady. You are maintaining your own emotional balance, your own identity, and your own sense of direction. That is what emotional independence really looks like. Not detachment, but stability within yourself, regardless of someone else's behavior. And that stability changes the entire energy of the connection. Over time, this creates a relationship dynamic that feels very different from one built on anxiety or pursuit. There is space, there is patience, there is room for both people to exist without pressure, and in that space, something more genuine can form. Not instant intensity, not emotional chaos, but a slower, quieter kind of attachment that builds through consistency and trust. It doesn't rely on convincing someone to stay or forcing them to feel something. They begin to choose it on their own. This is why these patterns feel so powerful. They are not about controlling an outcome, but about removing the conditions that create emotional resistance. When pressure decreases, clarity increases. When fear decreases, curiosity grows. And when emotional safety becomes consistent, attachment becomes more likely to deepen naturally over time. In the end, The most lasting form of connection is not the one built on urgency or emotional intensity, but the one where both people feel free enough to stay without being forced and safe enough to come closer without fear.